Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. So this week we're going to service this Specialized Diverge. We're going to replace the chain, we're going to strip this down, we're going to clean everything up, we're going to turn a tyre around, we're just going to do some adjustments, get this bike absolutely spot on. So this bike, as my understanding is, this is being through its first season, through the winter. The customer wants this serviced moving forwards to the spring. So the first thing we do is check the chain length. You can see here it's stretched off 0.75, so we need to replace this chain, or at this stage it will now wear down the rest of the group set. So this was perfect timing for a service on this bike because the chain wasn't too bad, but it needed replacing. You can see here it's a well-oiled chain. The bike is well oiled, so the customer's kept it correctly from the point of view of lubricating the bike and making sure everything's good to go between rides, so there's no rust involved. I know that this customer's been using this through the winter, and you can see how that grease or oil rather has built up, it's become pasty and has become more like a grease on the components. So it's important for us at this stage with the service to clean down the components, get all that build up off, so that moving forward as the customer continues to oil and lubricate the bike, you're not going to have a double build up of debris. So it's perfect timing. So you can see here there's a little bit of build up of debris on the derailleur. Again, it's wet. You can see on my hands there that the bike was built up nicely. In my mind, the customer has dealt with this bike correctly through the winter, so it's great. So we'll strip everything down. I'll get everything into my ultrasonic cleaner, and then we can move forward from there. You can see here a build up of grease on the back of the pedal arm there. That's actually from when the bike was built, so I'm sure the customers never took that off. So that's a build up of grease on the back, which we can wipe off. We can be a little bit more sympathetic when we put the component back together to try and avoid that happening, and again that will just stop that pastiness build up in the future between servicing. So now everything goes in the ultrasonic cleaner. So I've stripped off the components, we weigh up what we're going to clean and what we're not going to clean in the ultrasonic cleaner. In this instance we put both the derailleurs in, so they run through for about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes in our cleaner, and then I'll wash those off with warm soapy water to get that degreaser right off the bike, so that if I'm then oiling components, I'm not actually putting the oil on top of degreaser, because obviously it wouldn't work that way. So we clean everything off, we wash everything down. I'll dry all these components off before we go through the lubricating process. So we've done the rear derailleur, done the skewers, the front derailleur, the jockey wheels, even things like this spoke protector here. It's not our position as a bike shop to take components off of a customer's bike. We'll only do that by request. So it's a good thing to have on your wheel. It does protect the spokes. It's there for a reason. If you do drop the chain over the top, you're not going to damage your spokes and cut those up and have broken spokes. So they're not a bad thing to have on your bike. So wash down the chain set as well. Avoid dunking the pedals. You saw that I put those in the ultrasonic cleaner separately to everything else, so as I could make sure the pedals were out of the ultrasonic cleaner, and we can turn it and rotate it just to make sure that that's absolutely spotlessly clean. And then we just re-lubricate everything. So start off with the jockey wheels. Because these are the ones with the bushes in the centre rather than bearings, we put those in and we just re-lubricate the bushes just to make sure they're nice. A little bit of Loctite on the derailleur here just to make sure they don't come undone riding along. They do originally have a form of Loctite on those threads, so it's important to make sure that that thread is locked off nicely, so that's what we did there. And then I also just lubricate the pivot points of the derailleur and the derailleur spring. That would have originally been lubricated from the factory. We use the Shimano grease the same, and then we just wipe that over with our finger. That'll just stop that spring going rusty and spoiling, so that's good. I'll also always lubricate your through axles. That will stop those sticking in the axles, so I use 2 forms of grease on there just to make sure that's right. And then I just start little things like this. I'm just torquing up the chain set bolts just to make sure they're all correct, and then I'll just wash the frame down. Good time for me to just check the frame over, check fittings, check components that are left on the bike just to make sure they're all okay. Wash down the entire frame. I mean, it's lovely to present a bike all clean as well, so a good time to wash a bike down is when you've got all the components off, because you can get to areas that you can't get to when the bike's built up, most notably around the bottom bracket area there, where if you've got your chain set on and your pedal arm, you can't really wipe that surface down so well, so that's why we wash down the bike. Now with your discs, they do get scores, they get little lines build up in them. You can just see them there where I haven't sanded so far. They act like a record player, so a record would have little lines and grooves in them, and the needle would sit in there and it would sing, and that's exactly what causes you squealing on your brakes. So we always sand down the surface of the brake disc itself, and we also sand the surface of the pads themselves just to take away any of that scoring that could cause brakes to squeal. And this is one thing we've often mentioned on the channel: rotation of your tyre. Most tyres will have either an arrow or the word rotation like that to show which way round they rotate, and in this instance the front tyre was actually rotating the wrong way, so at some point that's probably come off the bike for a puncture, been put back on the wrong way round. And it's just something I always take note of, because it will, depending on the tyre, will depend on how the water clears away from the centre of the tyre, and also the grip levels on certainly on a tyre like this. So it's important to get your tyres the right way around. So we just turned that tyre around before we start rebuilding the rear wheel. So look at that cassette. I mean, it looks lovely, looks brand new. That's always a pleasing sight to see when you start to put things back on the bike and they're looking so nice. And then I'll just deal with the pads themselves. These pads were spotless. I mean, this bike in general was in very good condition, so this is all preventative maintenance. It's a great thing to do, especially at the end of a winter, moving into the drier weather, just to get your bike serviced. You can see the old pads on the top there, the clean ones on the bottom. The top ones, they're not that dirty, but you could see the difference there as to why we service them. So a little bit of grease inside the chain set there. I've made sure that there wasn't too much on this outside here, so that when we put the arm on, we're not going to get that debris built up that we cleaned off. And we preload the bearing there, torque them up, make sure everything's spot on there, and then I know that that chain set and bottom bracket and the bearing felt okay, and I know that's all okay there now. We can now start to put the components on, front derailleur, rear derailleur and so on, get them recabled. So if you are new to the channel, or indeed if you've watched many of our videos before but you're not subscribed, please do subscribe, because my son helps me with these videos. He does all the filming and all the editing and spends far longer on each of these videos than I do, and it's just nice for us to see the subscribers coming in. So please do subscribe, because it does help us as a channel to grow, and it helps us to see where we're growing and what videos perform well. So do knock that subscribe button. Do drop us a comment. We read all the comments. We do enjoy comments, so do drop us a comment as well about your preventative maintenance. This here, that thread is really important to grease on these pivot points, because they're notorious for bonding, they corrode. So you get the pin stick inside the caliper, and they're sometimes really hard to undo. It's a good preventative maintenance to just do that thread there and make sure that that's all set up nicely. Put the clip on the back just to make sure it doesn't come undone as well. So we've got the brakes now sorted out, we've cleaned the pads, we've done the calipers, made sure that pivot point is nice, and now we're just going to put on a fresh chain. So this is a brand new chain on here. Put on the clutch there on the rear derailleur, set everything up nicely, make sure it's all changing gear nicely. Front and rear derailleurs are working perfectly, so we just change gears all the way through the gear ratios just to make sure it's spot on. We also check the brake calipers are shutting off in the right place and that the wheel's freewheeling nicely, which is what we just did there. And then we run through the bike with a torque wrench. And this bike was really important for what we're about to show you alone. Was a really important service. So we did the head bolts here, and this stem bolt there was completely loose. So this stem was literally held on by this one bolt at the bottom. Now the issue with that is if you suddenly had to swerve to miss something, you could have a risk of your stem and handlebars turning on the forks and creating a crash. So really important to make sure your stems are torqued up correctly, and for that bolt alone this service was worth its weight in gold really for the customer. So I make sure I do the through axles to the correct torque as well. All the bolts, all the pinch bolts, we just check everything on a bike when we're servicing it. So this was a pretty routine service, pretty standard really. Run through the bike, make sure everything's clean, lubricated correctly, tightened up correctly, tyres on the right way around, new chain. So moving forwards, this bike is now like it was new again. Everything's working perfectly, and I'm happy for this to go through the spring before it even needs servicing again. So perfect time to get your bike serviced in the spring, just after all the grimy weather. Get them all cleaned up, get them ready for the spring, and as you can see, what a huge difference we've made to this bike. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.